Hello and welcome to Experiment to Innovate. In this session, we'll be having a look at exactly how experimentation can drive innovation at your company. My name's Ken. I'm a solutions consultant at Amplitude, and I've spent the past 6 years working at a couple experimentation software development companies, first Optimizely and now Amplitude, where I've helped our customers across Europe build and grow their experimentation programs. Now, you might be asking, why do we even need to cover this topic? Everyone agrees that experimentation helps with innovation. Well, we're going to be getting into that. I came across an interesting study by Forrester, which noticed that while data access was increasing, according to most reports, such as self-service data access, data catalogs, more people, more context, the number of data-driven decisions was actually going down. And this made me wonder, what could be causing this? Apparently, we aren't quite getting exactly what we've been promised when it comes to data access and the outcomes that can drive. And I think by better understanding the link between experimentation and innovation and some of the practical takeaways, we can help ensure that at our own companies, we make more data-driven, data-informed decisions. So we'll start by having a look at the theory. Asking the question, first of all, what is innovation anyway? How do we define it? And why is it important? And then secondly, why do we think experimentation can help drive innovation? From there, we'll try and unpack some of the evidence. Which companies are experimenting at scale? Are they innovative? And is there a way to measure this? What are the outcomes? And even comparing experimentation to some other practices employed by software product development teams, such as Agile, to see if there's evidence that experimentation is equally or more effective. And finally, we'll talk about some of the takeaways. How can we apply this? How can we experiment differently if innovation is indeed our goal? And throughout this presentation, I'll be mentioning some of the research I did for my master's thesis, and I'll link to that at the end as well, if anyone's interested in diving a bit deeper. So let's get started then with the theory behind this. Now, if we have a look at the literature and blogs online and writers on the subject, we see that there are often considered 4 forms of innovation: product, building better products, launching them, technologically new, or significantly improved over what's currently out there, whether our own products or those of our competition. There's process innovation, coming up with new or better ways to design, analyze, or develop products. There's market innovation, novel approaches to pricing, packaging, and promotions. And there's organizational innovation, coming up with the new business practices or workplace organization. Now, for the most part, experimentation that we're looking at today is going to be focused on product innovation, although you could make some arguments that there's opportunities for process and market innovation as well as part of what we think of experimentation on digital products. Now, if we try and define innovation further, we'll find a whole number of different definitions throughout the web and academic literature as well. And there's a lot of variety here. We see some common themes, though, come up. For example, in the Business Dictionary, they talk about the process of translating an idea into a good or service that creates value, and the goal being focusing on the process and the value creation itself rather than the idea. Some writers point to the importance of it being a new product that achieves success, and then goes on to define success maybe as profits or ROI or market share. Others are talking about, again, creating new value for customers, coming up with ideas that result in positive net benefits for the firm, value added, novelties, and in this case, arguing that it's both a process and an outcome. So there's a lot of variety there, but we definitely see some common themes coming up again and again, that innovation is all about ideas, about novelty, about new products, creating value. The process and the outcome are both part of innovation. And that we want to achieve some success, and that in some way we're concerned about what this means for our customer. So we don't have to all agree on the exact same definition, but I think it's key to kind of address and understand these core components of innovation itself. So let's have a look then at why experimentation might lead to us being able to innovate, to create new, interesting products that create value for our firm and for our customers. And there seem to be 3 main reasons that are discussed for why this might be the case. The first is that experimentation can help with an improved perspective on problem solving. The second is that it can give you a better understanding of your users or customers. And third is that it can give you an enhanced ability to prioritize your efforts. So let's unpack each of these in a little bit more detail. First, having improved perspective on problem solving. We're probably all aware, but at the core of experimentation is this idea of coming up with a hypothesis, the if then because statement. And what's so powerful about a hypothesis is it really forces us to frame our problem solving in a really productive, effective way. We have to come up with an idea. We have to relate that idea to our user, and we have to predict how and why that idea will ultimately drive value for us as a business. And there are a few things that experimentation does when it helps us frame our problem solving this effective way. First of all, it encourages us to come up with many ideas to our problems. The goal here isn't to, by committee, come up with the best idea and then test it, but rather we want to come up with as many ideas as we can. A hypothesis also encourages us to think user-centric about our problems. And that is to say something along the lines of, our users aren't able to find the information they're looking for on this page, rather than we have a low conversion rate at step 3 of our booking funnel. You can see the difference and how one lends itself to proposing a potential outcome, a potential solution to this problem, whereas the other does not. Hypothesis, like we said, is also very effective at tying problems and solutions to business value. I.e., if we're running experiments on parts of our product that are not important to top-level metrics, then we're mostly wasting our time. And we can use a hypothesis to make sure that the outcome we expect is one that matters. And finally, an experiment helps us to focus on learning rather than solving. Not all experiments are going to win, but regardless, we can learn something from them that helps us improve as a business. And that really ties us into our second point, that experimentation can lead to innovation because it gives us a better understanding of our users. Most software development companies these days believe in some form of agile. And at the core of agile software development is really this idea of building these feedback loops, i.e., the faster we can get a product into the hands of customers, learn what they like and don't like about it, and then use that to guide the next steps of our development, the better. And there are many ways to get that feedback, but experimentation might just be the best in terms of how rapidly we can do this, how tight we can form these feedback loops, and how we can interpret that customer feedback in a statistically rigorous way. And finally, experimentation gives us an ability to prioritize. Ultimately, the goal is to stop building features that aren't going to improve the things that matter to our business. And by putting resources where it matters, we're putting resources effectively on innovation rather than on dead ends. This also means that we can have some tools to help us quantify trade-offs when we're making decisions. No one's proposing that experimentation means you should outsource all your decisions to an AI algorithm or a statistics engine. And we certainly don't expect that all business decisions can be quantified. However, the goal should be to quantify the parts of it that are suitable to be quantified and give our business decision makers the information they need, the numbers they need to make those tougher trade-off decisions. And so if we're able to prioritize effectively, we can put resources in the right place, we can make informed decisions, and we can spend more of our efforts innovating. So that's a little bit about innovation, coming up with a shared definition, and tying together some of the theoretical ideas as to why experimentation can help drive that innovation. Next, if this is the case, we should be able to find some evidence for this. We can start by asking which companies are experimenting at scale. And then, are those companies innovative? And is it possible to measure that innovation? And finally, whether it's possible to determine if experimentation is more predictive of innovation than other practices that software development teams might be following. So in order to determine which companies are experimenting at scale, I looked to two data sources. First of all, we're all familiar with LinkedIn. As of the time doing this research, there were over 660 million profiles on LinkedIn. So we have this huge wealth of knowledge of job titles, current and former companies, headlines for each person, as well as descriptions. So in their own words, how do people describe the work they did at a given company in a given role? I also pulled a second job posting database with nearly 10 million job postings, which again contain job titles and companies, and this time job descriptions. So how does a hiring manager or an HR business partner describe a job in terms of the skills and abilities that they would like a person to have? So taken together, these can give us a bit of a picture of what companies are doing and what they'd like to be doing in terms of how they develop software. Now, from a variety of sources, I compiled a list of keywords that are associated with experimentation and A/B testing. You can see some of them here: analytics, prototyping, metrics, experiments, and so on. And I was able to search those two job databases, LinkedIn and JobsPicker, for product manager and software engineer profiles that contain these keywords. And I narrowed down my search to 8 companies, the largest 8 enterprise software development companies, according to the Fortune 500 ranking. So when we perform that analysis and we count the occurrences of those keywords on product manager and software engineer profiles at these 8 companies, then normalize the scores, we can actually rank our companies in terms of how prevalent experimentation is as a practice, between 0 and 1. Now, that might be the easy part, getting an estimate of the prevalence of experimentation. Next, we need to measure the innovation level of these companies. And this one's a bit harder and maybe a bit more subjective. I came across 4 common ways experimentation has been attempted to be quantified. The first is perception. How do peers in your industry rank you as a company? And fortunately for us, the Boston Consulting Group has ran a survey for the last 14 years surveying executives, most recently used 2,500 executives, on who they viewed as innovative in their industry and adjacent industries. The second is patent activity. And I was able to pull 10 years of patent data from the USPTO, again, weighing that for recency in terms of how many inventions, so to speak, these companies have decided to protect with patents. The third is R&D index. This was proposed, according to one of the consultancies, as a good way to measure innovation, and is effectively defined as the growth rate divided by the R&D spend. In other words, how much growth are you getting for every dollar that you spend on developing new products? And finally, we have profitability. If you're innovative, perhaps you're more profitable by beating your competitors and developing great new products with profit margins. And we define that as revenue divided by R&D plus sales and marketing spend. Now, when we calculate those values for each of our customers in each of the companies in our study, and then look for correlations with their experimentation score, we find something interesting. Actually, 3 of the 4 are negatively correlated with experimentation: industry ranking, patent activity, and profitability. Now, we can make some educated guesses as to why this might be. For example, profitability. Maybe the companies who experiment a lot are the ones who are growing faster and aren't focusing on profitability so much as they are reinvesting their efforts on growth. Patent activity as well. We all know IBM is known for doing a lot of patenting, and maybe this is a more traditional way to protect innovation and intellectual property, something that modern, fast-growing software companies aren't so interested in. Now, if we have a look at the R&D index, on the other hand, there's a very strong positive correlation with experimentation. So it seems that companies are growing fast relative to their spend in R&D are actually very likely to be experimenting more than similar companies. So we could dive into this a little bit more detail and have a look at each of those keywords that we use to track experimentation. And we see consistently a positive correlation with all of those keywords and the R&D index. So we might be asking now, well, what about other practices that software development teams are doing? And I explored a few of those as well, noting things that are commonly cited as sources of innovation today, like agile, like customer centricity, how frequently you're releasing, whether you're structured in a multidisciplinary product team. And for each of those, I came up with a number of keywords. Again, check the LinkedIn and JobsPicker databases before looking for correlations with R&D index. And none of those had as strong a positive correlation as did experimentation. So now that we've captured some evidence to suggest that experimentation does drive innovation, at least in one form, defined as growth for R&D spend, let's have a look at what that could mean for how we experiment if innovation and growth is indeed our goal. First, I think it really all comes down to understanding our customer. And this seems to be something that the most successful companies, the most successful product teams really emphasize. There are many ways to understand your customers. Experimentation is just one of those ways. Maybe the most important if the previous correlations are to be believed, but certainly a very important way to understand our customers. And if we go back to one of our definitions of innovation, about the process of translating an idea or invention into a good or service that creates value, I'd argue that a hypothesis is really that link between idea, user, and value. And if we can build that direct link in a way that can be tested, there's no better way to understand our customers. The second takeaway for making this more practical is that structure is not always our enemy. Maybe it's oversimplifying things a bit, but I think we can all kind of subscribe to this idea, or at least we've heard it somewhere before, that to be creative, we don't want to have too many rules and processes in place. And there might be some truth to that as well. It'd be natural to think that in order to get more great ideas for building our products and experimenting, we need to get more people involved in the process and collect ideas from everywhere. And that's certainly valuable. I'm not going to tell you not to do that. However, that can come at the cost of the quality of experiments you run and the ability to interpret results and move quickly on findings. And so there has to be a balance for product teams in terms of putting the frameworks in place that allow widespread experimentation and contributions from different roles and different teams, while still enabling you to easily interpret results and move quickly on findings. And I think Booking.com put this very well. Lucas Vermeer said that it's all about the centralization of technology, what enables the decentralization of decision making. If you want teams to be empowered to make their own decisions, you have to give them a framework and the tools in order to not have to worry about those things and instead focus on their user problems and solving those and making decisions. And the easy answer, which is not always so easy in practice, is that it's all about building that culture of experimentation where you don't have to have rigid rules in place, yet you can still ensure people are guided by the same principles as they go about making data-informed decisions. And finally, it's about rethinking your problem solving. We talked a little bit before about getting ideas from anywhere. Chances are your product manager doesn't have all the answers, nor do the developers working with them. But if you include the support team, the marketing team, the sales team, the executives, the legal team, you'll get more varied ideas for how to improve your products that you can test, and you'll be more likely to find things that surprise and delight your users. Again, it's also really important to express our problems from the user perspective. We've got to keep that user as very centric to all of our ideation efforts, our hypothesis building, and our interpretation of results. And finally, it's always good practice to ideate many solutions to the problems that we come up with. We can borrow from design thinking's idea of a crazy eight to try and brainstorm many ideas before testing as many of them as effort and traffic levels permit. If we're often running A/B tests with a single variant against the control, then probably we're basically doing decision making by committee or the highest paid person's opinion, and we're simply using A/B testing to get a rubber stamp on that idea, when really that's not the goal. The goal is to test all the ideas regardless of where they came from. So I hope that gave you something to think about in terms of the theory of innovation and experimentation, that link, some of the evidence that suggests this link is valid, and then finally some of the practical applications of how we can test differently if we do indeed want to continue to drive innovation in our products and our companies. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions or comments after watching this, and if you do want to dive deeper into the research and some of the numbers, you're welcome to do so as well. Thanks very much. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.